you're beginning. So good morning. So now, do you have any questions from last week or um, any questions, comments, requests um, that you'd like to have me answer?
Is Beverly putting any chat? Nothing.
No, nothing in the, oh, so yeah, so I don't see her. Yeah, I don't, I see her microphone is on, but so I don't see any chat, and I should actually, I'll have to make sure to, if you could, as we're going
Yes, I'll
along.
keep an eye.
Thank you, because I think it's just us three, which okay, that's
Oh,
here we are.
oh, yeah.
So today what we're going to be doing is we're going to be cutting out, sewing together, and lining the jacket. So what we're really going to be doing is finishing the jacket because the next and last class, which is not next Saturday but the following Saturday, we're going to be doing the pattern work and the construction on the cuff for the sleeve. So that's kind of the arc of where we're going. So why don't we just get busy, shall we? So let's see.
Perfect.
Okay, so first we're going to be sewing the where are we? Sewing the peplum. Aha, here we are here. And so what I'm going to do, as I've done before, just make this a little smaller. So I will turn off this here. So like I said, if you could keep an eye on Beverly to see if she has questions, that would be great. So let us begin, shall we? So here we have all of the pieces for the front on the table. We have the side front, we have the body front after we have added the darts. And I'm going to zoom in here. As you can see, I have put stay tape along let's see, first off, the necks hang on, and the armholes. Hang on one moment here. So then moving down. Stop. I think I'm getting ahead of myself here. So I think I may have, come on, let's turn this back. I think I may have started on the wrong one because let's see, lining, cutting. Okay, there we are. So bear with me. I'm a little bit flaky because I realized we had not done the cutting and marking. So let us start with that because I realized that we didn't do that. So okay. So it's been, oh, there we are. So okay. Before we actually lay out and cut, I want to just talk about the seam allowances. This is the front, the two peplum pieces, the side front, side back, and back. And all of the pieces in this pattern get 5/8 inch seam allowances. Now, when I cut, I'm going to actually mark the stitching lines and such in these areas for construction. But 5/8 of an inch is the general rule. I will talk about the exception in just a moment. The exceptions to the 5/8 inch seam allowance rule are on the facings. So the seam lines where the facing joins the lining here, there, and there, those I give 3/4 of an inch. I like a little extra seam allowance when I'm joining a lining to a facing on something like this. It gives you a little extra ease inside the garment. So now that we have the seam allowances on all of our pattern pieces, we will start laying out and cutting. Now I have laid out and cut everything off camera, as you can see. These are sleeve linings, lining back, lining front, lower facing, the front facing, and the neck facing. Now, this piece here, I will mark stitching lines when we get to the marking portion, but these are the lining and the facing pieces. And here we have upper sleeve, under sleeve, jacket back, jacket side back. These I just cut out with 5/8 inch seam allowances. No marking really is needed on these. And these are the front pieces. This really is the meat of what we're going to be learning. So we have the main body piece here. We have the lower body piece here. We have the peplum facing here, and we have the side front here. These pieces will actually get stitching lines marked along the construction lines so that it will be easier to see them when we put them together. So now I will go off camera and mark what needs to be marked, and I will bring it back and show you the results. Now I have the front all cut out and marked. So now I'm going to turn it over to show you what the different pieces look like. I will start over here. Now, notice I have marked all the stitching lines as well as the letters on the pattern. These I find are just helpful when we assemble. I do this myself, and I recommend you do this as well when you're constructing yours. So here is the main body piece. And when I flip this over, again, you can see I have marked all the stitching lines, and I have marked all of the letters, and of course, the darts. So moving forward, this one is the peplum facing. With the letters. And then below that, the lower body. And then finally, the facing. And on the facing, you only really have to mark those 2 points there. So the takeaway here, marking is extremely important for this particular construction. And you will be very happy if you have taken the time to mark all of the pertinent information on the fronts. The backs and the sleeves, you can just add the 5/8 inch seam allowance and sew it together, but the fronts require lots and lots of marking. So once we have everything marked, we can begin construction.
Okay, so I see a chat. Let's see. Where do I find the chat in this thing? Chat. Let's see. Okay, yeah, Beverly, we'll keep you in mind. So don't be shy about chatting. Welcome, Trisha. How are you? Let's see.
Doing good. Sorry, I was running late, but happy to be here.
Not to worry. So let's see. One moment, please. I have to sort through. I've mislaid one of my videos that I wanted to play. Sewing the peplum. There we are. That's the one. Okay, so let's see. Find you all again. Up there you are. So yes, so as you can see, marking is really important on this. I can't imagine just adding 5/8 and seam allowances and a few Taylor tacks and hoping that this works out, because this is such a precise thing. So a little kind of fill you in on the book. So far, so good. I haven't heard anything else. I'm going to send an email today, because one of the things I'm doing is I'm preparing more, because see, one of the things I realized with the Bella backstory is there are so many different plot points between when the guys were arrested and when they were convicted that I never covered. And so it's been kind of fun to go in and backfill all of that. And, in crowd scenes, you're going to see Lola's headdress here or here, or, there's one where she's in a bar watching a TV and you just see her from behind. So,
I love that. Like there's one at when she did the show, when Bella did the show, she was in the audience. And
yeah,
things like that.
I have to say that if I could do this all the time for a living, that would be a really fun living, I have to say. Because when I was doing the whole story for the book, that part was really, really wonderful. So, when I had to, I think I talked to you all last Saturday when I got everything sorted out and sent back to them. And it was really kind of fun to just look at the story, like aside from all the sewing, and just kind of follow the story. And at the end, it was like, yeah, that was good. So that's where we're at right now. I will keep you
What I
updated.
love about it is all the attention to detail, like all the little things that you've had to make to create this story and all. I mean, it's just it's impressive, the amount of work. I know it doesn't go unnoticed. I want you to know.
Thank you. Okay, Beverly, it's a sewing book, but it's a story. So Lola, there at the different plot points in the story, the outfits that Lola wears are the pattern and the lessons. So it's a story, but it's a sewing book. And so one of the things I'm asking, because I've got to be nice to this gal for a little while longer before I really tell her what I think. But what I'm asking for is a reader magnet, that there are all these buzzwords in publishing. And what I'm asking for is just to do a PDF of just the story from start to finish, no sewing, because I want to use that as kind of a, if you buy the book and say you bought the book, I'll email you the PDF, but I also want to use that for promotion, because I know a lot of PR people are not going to sort through a sewing book to try to find a story. But if you get them engaged in the story, then they're more likely to look at the book. So that's what I'm doing. But because see, the next step is, because see, she's actually going to be on the courthouse steps after she's testified. And then there's going to be, they were convicted. And then she's going to be talking to a literary agent. And then the cover of Variety, they've signed up for her manuscript of, her autobiography, Fleeing Uphill in High Heels, A Tale of Fear and Hope. And then she's going to have her book published. And I have the little stack of her little books. Then that dovetails into the book. So if one gave it as a gift, it would, yes, absolutely. Well, learn to sew to a certain extent. It's a how-to, and there are lots and lots of photos. Trust me, I took them all. I think you would have to know a little bit about sewing to do it, but I think you could get there if you had even, a rudimentary knowledge of sewing. So yeah, the answer is a qualified yes. They would be able to learn how to sew those clothes. There's how I mark, how, like the hand stitches that you need. There's quite a lot of information there. When I look back on it, it was like, how I know there's a lot of information in there, because there was so much to get wrong, and there was so much wrong that I'm sincerely hoping that we have all sorted out. So was it not? Yes, actually, very good. It's not. It's at the end of the Barry Manilow song, Lola, she was a showgirl. At the end, she drinks herself half blind. I start there. And so she's still drinking. She's following the Bella story like all New Yorkers were and are. And then she has an epiphany at a certain point and decide, and this is where the book starts. She decides to go into rehab and get herself cleaned up. And then she connects up with crazy Bella. And then Bella brings her to the Kenneth D. King studio, where everyone in the studio decides she needs a new wardrobe, she needs a hand, and it goes from there. So it is based on the song, because Lola, the showgirl, has her headdress is permanently bolted to her head. So when I bought her because she had this big headdress. And when I saw her, it was like, her name is Lola. She was a showgirl. So yes, you picked up on that one. So all good. So questions, other,
Yes, I
yes,
have a question. Can you show us how are you sewing all of Bella's outfits? Because I have done models in my architectural school,
Yeah.
and I know how they are, God is in the details. And
Yeah.
you have done that immaculately.
Yes.
I'm like, every time I see any of those pictures, I'm like, oh my Lord,
Yeah.
he have spent hours.
Yeah. Well, this is what the book is my techniques for how to, because little tiny clothes construct differently, obviously, than full scale clothes. Like, for example, a fully lined jacket constructs completely differently in 1/6 scale. So yes, and there are lots of pictures. So, and my husband was like, holy cow, all these pictures, like, well, honey, it may make your brain freeze because you're not doing it, but people who are doing it now, they're not going to be huge, but there's a lot of them. And one of the things I did when I was going through this manuscript is doing crop boxes, because for Threads magazine, they always told me, come back a little bit so we can crop. And so this art director, I feel bad for him. He just took the photos, full frame. So one of the things I did in this whole, going through, was to draw a crop to show, crop to here, make the information fill as much of the frame as possible. So yes, that is my aim. See, with everything I try to teach, I want to give you as much detail as possible so that you have a fighting chance of actually doing this. So yes, it's a long answer, but there you have it. Okay. Okay. So let's continue. Now we're going to actually sew this thing together. So let's see. So here we are. So, and again, and if someone, like, before, keep an eye so that Beverly can actually ask her questions in the chat, because I want her to be able to ask questions as well. And as before, if you have questions, tell me to stop the video and I'm happy to do that. So here we have the construction.
So here we have all of the pieces for the front on the table. We have the side front, we have the body front after we have added the darts. And I'm going to zoom in here. As you can see, I have put stay tape along the necks and the armholes. So then moving down, we have over here, we have the lower body piece, and we have the peplum facing. So these are the 4 pieces that we're going to be using to construct. We have a lot of work to do, so let's get busy. We begin by pinning the peplum facing to the main body piece. We match it at point C, we match it at point D and point E. And as you can see here, there's D, there's point E, there's point C, and we pin based stitching line to stitching line. For accurate sewing. As you saw in the last shot, we have everything marked. So we're going to be sewing starting at point C sewing all the way past point D. And to do that, I will meet you at the machine. For demonstration purposes, I'm using orange thread just so you can see what looks like when everything is being sewn. To begin, we're going to actually put the needle in at point C with a standard stitch, back tag, and then we're going to just sew on this seam line. Pardon the hand. Once we've sewn this, we will go back to the work table to trim. So here we are. We've sewn from point C all the way past point D. Now, before we trim our seam allowances, we want to turn the work over. And we want to cut the corner right to the end of that stitching. Right to the end. Don't go past it, but right to it. Now, this is a little cheat that I use when clipping curves. I use the pinked rotary cutter blade. As you can see, it has a wavy profile. So really the easy way, fold this out of the way and come in.
Is it
Trim's
not
about a quarter of an inch.
grade seams, Kenneth?
What's the question?
Is it not? I was curious. You didn't need to grade the seams, like
No, on this, I don't feel the need to, because when you're clipping a curved seam like that, I find that trimming it out like this seems to work better.
yeah.
Wanted to grade it, that's absolutely, grade it and then do the stagger your clips on the corners. That is entirely kosher as well. But for a thick fabric like this, especially one that's block fused, it doesn't matter.
Okay.
Okay.
Thanks.
Okay. So
Now we will go over to the pressing table. First, we press as sewn. And then, and this is where the edge of the pressing sleeve board is going to come in really handy. I like to, as best I can, press this seam allowance open. It just gives a better result after we turn. And then put it on the edge, and this is where you have to be careful not to burn your fingers. And if you can't get all the way in, that's not going to kill you. Okay, so we have the seam allowances pressed open. Now we want to turn this right side out. Like so. And now this is where, now if I were doing this for a real garment, I would use a pressing cloth. But since this is a sample, I'm just going to press directly onto the fabric. I like to press to here, and then I'm going to press to here, and then press the curve. And the object, which I'll show you a little closer in just a moment, the object is to try to roll the seam slightly back so that it will hide allow that to cool for a moment. And so, as you can see, the seam rolls ever so slightly back. That's considered good form. So, back to the work table.
I'm going to stop for a moment. I see we have a chat. Let's see. One new message. Love. Oh, okay. Thanks, Trisha. Okay, so.
It never hurts to have some tailor basting to hold everything together. So next, pull this back here. Next, we are going to join this seam down to point F with this seam down to point F. So I will go off camera and pin these two together, matching both points F. As you can see, I pin basted. So I have matched and pin basted from here down to point F. So what I will do off camera, I will go over to the sewing machine and sew down to point F and back tack. And I will bring you back the results.
Beverly did
Yes,
have a
let's see.
question about favoring.
Okay. Yes.
In the she says, why do you not favor the seam by reducing 1/8 of an inch like on lapels? Or did you do this already and you forgot? But you did do that, right?
Well, actually, I didn't, but on something like this, where this is not like a lapel or like a another kind of detail, because see, the top edge of this is going to be kind of loose inside the garment. You can get away with not doing it. Now, if you wish to do it, you could. But I found for this particular thing, it's not absolutely necessary to, because see, generally what I would do, yeah, on something like this is I would actually shave 1/8 of an inch off around that edge on the facing itself. So, if I wanted to be dead correct, that's what I would do. But what I found in this particular thing is that it kind of works whether you do the favoring or not. Okay. So, so is there another, do we have another?
Yeah, and she asked, so is it fabric dependent? And I thought you had removed the 1/8, but maybe not on the facing of the peplum. You did it on the
I didn't, but it's a good idea. And fabric dependent, yes. This is a really malleable fabric, so you can get away with a lot of kind of fudging here and there. But if it were something like a wool sateen, you would definitely want to favor the facing.
I have a question. Also, for the facing, this one, it's even probably the roll is less than 1/8 of an inch. It's probably, if you measure it, probably 1/16 of an inch.
Well, but in pattern making, for a garment like this, for fabric like this, in the pattern, it will be 1/8 of an inch less. But when in practice, when you actually press it and favor it, it does come out more like 1/16 because the turn of cloth absorbs that other 1/16 of an inch. Did that make sense? Hello? Did that make sense? I don't hear any.
Yeah,
Okay.
yes, that's what I always think of, especially first of all, the favoring is depend on the thickness of the fabric,
Right.
and the other thing is where it is at and how much I'm going to be favoring, how much I'm going to be rolling.
Yes. Well, see, like I said, what I, for this kind of, if I were doing this in a thinner fabric, the favoring, I would make it a little less than 1/8 of an inch, but a little more than a 1/16, like 3/32 if you're really wanting to split hairs. So the thinner the fabric, the thinner the favoring that you would make in the pattern, but it would be no less than 1/16 of an inch. Did that make sense? Yes, no, maybe?
Yeah, she's shaking her head. Yes.
Oh, okay.
I don't know
So
if you can see us.
yeah, I've turned the camera off, so you have to kind of
Yeah,
make a noise here. So yes.
she's nodding yes.
Okay, that's fair. Okay, so other questions? Okay, so let us continue.
I've sewn all the way down to point F. Now, what we want to do is clip. Doesn't hurt to clip through both. So we've clipped to point F. But first, I want to press all of the seam allowances towards the front. So I will go off camera and do that and bring you back the results. Back from the pressing table, and see, as you can see here, I pressed all the seam allowances towards the front. And before I go anywhere else, I'd like to grade that seam allowance down from the side panel just to reduce the bulk. So this is where things get exciting. What we want to do is match the cut edges. So really what we're doing is we're matching points G with this point G. And we bring in the lower body. So we have 3 points. Well, we have 4 thicknesses total. The G from the lower body, the G from this particular, the peplum and the facing, and the G from the side. So just match there. And there we are. All the way through. So from here, we're going to match this all the way down, pinning all the seam allowances together. With the pin basting. And we'll end up matching points D as well. So here's point D, matching to point D. Match that corner as well. There we are. It's all matched. There. So we will go over to the machine and sew from point G all the way down past D, all the way down to here. So I will meet you at the sewing machine. Since we have so many thicknesses on this seam, I'm going to use the walking foot. That way everything moves through the machine evenly at the same time. And I'm going to lengthen the stitch to like a 3.5 stitch because the general rule is the more thicknesses, the longer the stitch. Okay. We have this sewn. So over to the pressing table. At the pressing table, what we want to do is, first off, to press everything as sewn. And then what we want to do is press this, the lower body back. Now, zooming in, one thing I like to do here is just turn this over. Below D, I like to make a clip right there below D. And I want this to press open. It'll just read very nicely below the pleat. And then what I like to do, I'll just do this here, is grade the seam allowances, because we don't need all of this thickness hanging out inside this garment. So the first one, 1/8 of an inch, and I can clip this little corner D. And then the second one is a little wider. And the third one is a little wider still. So you don't have all of those cut edges landing at the same spot on the inside of your garment. So as you can see, we have this all graded. So now let's go back to the work table. So here we are. Now, this is where everything gets interesting. This is where the pleat down here shows up. I'm going to turn this over. And what I want to do here at point C, I'm going to clip an angle to get that bulk out of the way. So there is point C here. So the next thing we're going to do is we're going to match B and C, putting right sides together, and you can kind of see how this sort of starts to buckle. That's what you want. Bringing everything together from B to C, sorry. What I will do, let me just pin this one on top of the other. Then you can kind of see how it's going to be working when we sew that seam. Now, when we sew that seam, we flip it over. That then creates the fold in the peplum. So we'll have a seam right here. So now let us go back, because here is where you want to just be very careful, because you have all of these pieces, these intersections kind of crashing into each other. So we want to match point B here with point B here. There's point B. Then we match point C with point C here. Like so. And I'm just going to pin that there for the time being, just to hold it. Now, once I have that matched, I'm going to work backwards. So I want to match that point there. That's point G, point G. So we're going to match this stitching line here. And we're going to kind of work this over. You have to kind of shift this around a little bit. And that there. Okay. So when it sews, it's going to start here, and we're going to sew all the way to here, and we'll sew little short stitches, and then the short stitches will come out to point B, and we'll back tack. But I'm going to show you that on the machine. So off we go to the machine.
I'm going to stop here and see if everyone's following, because this is like constructing IKEA furniture with all the letters and points. So is everyone with me? So
Yeah, I love it. I can see how having those letters is super helpful.
honestly, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So questions so far? Is everyone else, we're good? Okay.
Yes.
Okay. We will continue.
Now here we are at the machine, and you can see I'm using my old friend, the generic adjustable zipper foot. Notice that I have the needle to the left of the foot, right at the edge. This is going to make sewing this seam much easier than trying to sew it with a regular presser foot. We're going to sew it with a standard 2.5 stitch. Have everything pinned. So here's the fold. Let me just show you where we're at. There's the pins. We're going to end up down here. So you can start, you don't have to start dead at the fold at the end. You can start just a little ways in front of it. Okay, so we're getting close to point C. Point C is really one of those crucial things here. So we'll get up, okay. There's point C right there. This is where you're really going to be glad you have the generic zipper foot. So I'm going to shorten the stitch length, and it's about 1/2 to 3/4 of an inch before point C. I'm going to shorten it to 0.5 to 0.75. You want a strong stitch intersection. You have all this fabric coming together. And the beauty of the zipper foot is that you don't disturb any of the mass over to the left of the needle. So through. And I'll just keep on the short stitches to point B. It doesn't hurt. So at point B, you back tack. Remove it from machine, and let's just reiterate what we've done here. So we started sewing right there, and we've sewn all the layers. And this point here at point C, that's a little bit tricky. You have to be careful with that. And then the short stitches start about 3/4 of an inch from C, and I take them all the way to B, and then I back tack. As you can see, it's starting to look like something, but we need to press this seam here. So I'm going to turn this over. So what we want to do is we want to clip down to point C, and what that's going to look like. I'm going to clip this down right to there. And I'll clip this later, but we're going to press open from B to C. So what that will do is there we are. It's going to create a nice angle where that peplum runs into. So back to the work table.
Beautiful. So pretty.
It's a good one.
So here we are. We have one half of the jacket almost finished. This is what it looks like from the outside, obviously. Now, on the inside, you have this sort of hanging loose. So,
And I'm going to stop here about this hanging loose. This here is why I didn't really add the favoring to the pattern, because it kind of takes care of itself, because this whole thing sort of hangs loose inside the garment. So, I'm pointing that out now. I should have talked about it earlier, but there you have it.
what I like to do is sew what's called a thread chain. So let me zoom in, change the camera angle, and I'll show you how to make a thread chain. What a thread chain does is it holds layers so that they have a little range of motion. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make thread chains to hold at the two darts. So how it works, and I'm using a buttonhole thread, a Mara 30 for this. So what you're going to do is you're going to sew and you have a loop. And then you reach in and you continue to just make the loops like so. Now, some people will use a little tiny crochet hook. Yeah, you can do that, but if you don't want to get out your crochet hook, this is the easy way of doing it. And you just continue until you have enough length along the thread chain to hold it to the nearest place you're going to anchor. Now, let me just check and see. A few more. Okay, that should do it. Yep. So now you have your thread chain. You finish by taking your needle and putting it through the loop and pull it. That locks the chain. From here, you just tack it, the other end, to the anchor point. And you're done. So I will go off camera, work the other thread chain, and bring you back the results.
Beverly's asking a question. Would you ever make a balanced darts there? Would you ever make balanced darts there?
Yes, these are balanced darts. You can see, let me just go back. Yeah, so you can see there is one part of the dart. There would be the bias part of the dart. So both of these darts are sewn with a balanced dart. Okay.
Okay. So we have two thread chains that are holding up this seam allowance. And now let us survey what we have just created, because it is quite wonderful. So there you have it. Double peplum. Now, the next step, I will go off camera. I will construct the other half and sew the body together, because after that, we want to add the facings.
Okay, so questions? I love this. I just find this was a really fun little puzzle for me to figure out how
That's
it was
what I
all
was gonna
done.
say. It's a
Yeah.
fun puzzle. That's exactly what I'm thinking. I'm like, I want to try it. That's how I feel.
To see, if you understand the pattern making and the construction of this, next week when we adapt it to the cuff,
Yeah.
there's another little kind of twist I throw in, because if you notice on this, the fold kind of goes in line with that body seam. But
Yeah.
what I'm going to show you on the cuff is with slashing and spreading, you can actually have that kick out.
Oh.
And the thing is with insertions, as you add the insertion in the pattern where you want to have it occur in the garment. And so for the cuff, instead of it going kind of straight down, it kind of
Right.
angles out.
Okay. Ooh, I love it.
Yeah.
This
So
is like
I
totally my
love
thing.
all this stuff. So yeah. How's everyone else here? Let's see,
I
Beverly.
have a question
Yeah. Go ahead.
of it's like, maybe it's cultural, I have no idea. But I was not taught how to sew by professional. It's just like, and I didn't realize that the way that I was taught how to sew, it's all the super conservative couture way.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
And never the back stitch. My aunt and my mom, it's like, if you don't need to put an extra stitch and an extra thread in your garment, you don't. It's like a taboo, never do the back stitch.
Okay.
Well, so what's the, I want to,
Oh, you mean
I
the
was,
backpack, like in sewing?
yes, the backpack, yes.
Okay. Well, I understand that. Now, the workaround, because there are times, if you have a seam that intersects with another seam, you don't really have to backtack, because those two seams sewing together is going to take care of that. There are certain times you don't want the end of that seam to start coming unraveled. And so the workaround, if you don't want to do the backtack, because I understand what they're saying, is instead of hitting the back tack, is to shorten the stitch length to 0.5, because
Yeah, we used to get the string together and just make a tie and then snip it.
Yeah. Well, it's just different ways of going. I remember one time years ago when I first was teaching, there was a gal who, to hear her talk, she learned how to sew at the feet of the seamstresses for the czarinas in Russia. And that I tied a knot in the end of the thread. She was just horrified. And it was like I was this awful white trash, bad, and it was like, okay, I learned from my mom in Kansas, who didn't really like doing it. And so there are certain things that I understand that I do that would horrify people who were actually trained in the couture. My colleague, Susan Calgi, there are certain things like she pins perpendicular. Now, she never says anything about why would you pin parallel. That's how I learned it from my teacher. There, different. I think the thing is, different people have different approaches. And when I work with Susan Calgi, because I had a 10-year career in retail before I started my business, I worked in window display. So the thing we learned was never put your time where it doesn't show. So there are things that I do that Susan, who was trained in the couture, but she's too classy to say anything, would be horrified by. But we both aim at the same result, which is a beautiful result. So little things like tying the thread ends instead of doing a back tack or a short stitch, if that gets you the results you want, then that's what you stick with.
Okay, so it's not something with sewing, because I don't know, I'm not a professional, I'm an amateur, but
So, but sewing, whether you're professional or amateur, really the thing about professional is, do you get paid to do it?
Mm-hmm.
That's really the only difference between people who do it for a living and people who do it for their pleasure. The techniques are the same. There are, like ready to wear techniques are different than couture techniques, but it's like
from theater techniques. One question I have, which is probably a theater, and I learned to sew by my mom, and I've had I like taking lots of different classes and learning from lots of different people, and some people will be more hard-nosed about how you have to pin or how you have to do certain things. But I like to know all the reasons why. So one thing that I was thinking when you were doing your chain stitch, your thread tack, is in the theater world, whenever we do something like that, we would have like four strains of thread. I mean, if we didn't have like a buttonhole twist, but I probably still would have just sort of done a double thread there. Is there a
There's no reason why not to, because if you think about it, because see, in the theater they have to stand up to a lot of abuse.
yeah, we're
And
always
so-
like, what's gonna last the longest?
The closest I came was, this was years ago. I may have told this story. It was 2002, and 9/11 financially affected me a little later. So I was kind of hanging on. It was in August of 2002. The wardrobe manager of the San Francisco Ballet, who was a student of mine at one time, called me and said, we need 3 ballerinas costumes and 3 men's costumes embellished. We need the embellishments. You don't have to build it. You have to just do the embellishments. And it was August 15th. They had to get it back to them by September 15th, which was kind of tight, but and then they didn't get me any of the sketches or
a whole month. That's not tight.
Oh, well, no, but they
I
gave
know there's a lot that had to happen,
but they gave me everything the day before Labor Day weekend. And I got really quiet, and she said, we of course understand that rush charges apply. I said, that is correct. And so I turned that thing in September 14th. And all the people, I got a call on the 15th from the costume shop because they were expecting it was going to arrive a week late, because that seems to be what happened with some of their other experiences with costume shops. It's like, no, you're paying rush charges. You're going to get it. And of course, when someone asked me, how did you decide how much to charge? I said, I totaled up all my debts. I threw in 2 months rent. That is what I charged, because I had a gun to their head. They needed it, and they got it, and they were like, this was a win for them, because they were expecting it was going to arrive a week later. So they had extra time. But one of the things I learned there was, especially in the ballet, as you probably know, you have a bead come loose and that hits the floor, and that is bad news. And so, I was very conscious of double Nymo thread, really practically wiring everything down so that it wouldn't come loose. So yeah, so you're coming from that, which is, it's a different kind of discipline. It's all sewing. There are different approaches and different knowledge to different ways of sewing. It's kind of a long answer to your question, but that's okay. The people who get bound up in, it only has to be this way, it can't be any, what that tells you is that's the only way they know. And I tell my students when they ask me, well, what kind of seam finish should I use on this? And the answer is, it depends. How much time do you have? How much money are they spending? How long is it going to last? And in theater, these costumes, I'm told, are still on the stage like 20 years later. So yeah, different, but so it's kind of a long answer to your question. There are different ways of doing things. As long as you get the results you wish, then you've done it correctly. Okay. So other questions before we continue, because now we're going to actually make the facing. Now the facing, to get that little, well, I'll show you kind of what the meat of the matter is. Well, here, I'll do it on this side because it has a button. That little intersection, to get all of this here joined up, because that's what it looks like from the back. And you can see I use pick stitching on there because it's so pretty. So that is what we're doing next, because sewing and facing on. And another thing, did I show you all this stay tape, this fusible stay tape? Yeah, I just,
Yes, I haven't ordered it yet, but it is on my list, and it's going out in a newsletter. I'm sharing about it.
It rocked my world when I first came to know of it. So, I just, because I do the Wednesday evening tailoring class as well. So I figured, I remember showing it to them again, but I thought just in case. So, okay, so let us continue. So we are now going to be installing the facing. And so as before, if someone could keep track so that Beverly can ask her questions as well, so that she can get her answers, pardon me. Okay, so.
This is where we're going in the next operation. What we're going to be doing is adding the facing and preparing the jacket to receive the sleeves and the lining. Now you notice the facing goes on before the sleeves. This is because you don't want to have to deal with those two sleeves flapping around when you're trying to put your facing on. So there's quite a lot of work to do. So let's get busy. I have worked ahead, and what I've done here is I've pinned up along around the neck and down to here and sewn. So you can see, let me pull in a little closer. So you can see I've sewn all the way up and around, and I've stopped a little ways down. I haven't gotten all the way to the corners yet. But then I have also sewn, you can see here, I've sewn down along to about here. So now this may seem like a little herky-jerky way of doing things, but I like having some of this sort of nailed down before we continue, because we're going to be sewing in some different steps. So now I'm going to close in, close up, and change the camera angle. To begin, I'm going to start up here at point B, and I'm going to pin and sew down to here. So what that's going to look like, and I like to keep the seam allowances on top. I'm going to move this up, and then I'm going to take the pin and find point B. There it is, right there. There is point B. So I want that to match perfectly. And I'm going to pin that just like so to hold it. So from here, I want to match the stitching lines all the way along this front edge. And so the pin basting really is going to help me do that. This is where marking is very crucial. So I'm just going to keep working my way around. Now notice I'm holding this in a curve. That's because the facing needs to be a little bit shorter than the outer garment so that it will not buckle when you're sewing and when you're wearing it. The general rule is that when you're pinning or basting or otherwise constructing a garment, if it's going to sit, like for example, let me just zoom out a little bit here. If it's going to sit in a curve, it's going to be worn in a curve, you want to pin it in that same shape. And then after you sew it and press it, it will automatically fall into that shape. So now I've pinned this to here. So I'm going to work over. And I also now want to find the other point B and match that with the point B on the facing. Like so. So I'm going to pin that.
And Kenneth, I
Yes.
assume that it's important,
And I will
like you
go off.
said, when you're pinning, to be pinning with the body of the garment facing up towards you and the facing on the bottom. I would assume that's the same for when you're sewing it. You want to
That's
have the body of the garment up towards you.
Yeah, because then you can see exactly where you need to begin and end, especially all of this in this area here. It's much easier to see it because the bottom is just one big flat piece of fabric. Up in this area here, you've got all these seam allowances you have to navigate around. And so, especially if you're going to be sewing with short stitches, which we will be, the idea of picking all the stitches apart is just too gruesome to contemplate. So having everything, the body facing up is really the way to go. Okay.
And pin matching the seam lines down to here. So then both these lower edges will be pinned and ready for the machine. I'll bring you back the results after I have it pinned. So here you can see we started pinning up here at B, and we pinned to here. Now you could have had the pins all the way along here. That doesn't cause any trouble. I just wanted that pinned and out of the way. But then we pin from there up to here. So next, we will take this over to the machine and start sewing. So now, what we will do is we are going to be putting the needle in right at point B. And again, we're using orange thread for demonstration purposes. So we will sew. Back tack right at point B, and we're going to sew at the standard 2.5 stitch. And we'll sew all the way around. So we have one side. I'll remove the work, and then we continue on. Right there. For accurate sewing, like I said, you could have pinned and sewn this all in one pass, but I just find that when you're really wanting to make something accurate, sew it in stages, much easier. So then So we are now coming up on point B. So we will stop right at B and back tack. From here, let me just show you the results. So we've sewn all the way up, back tack to point B. Next, we go back to the work table. So now, zero in on this a little bit. There you can see that we've back tacked at point B. And this instruction applies for both sides. So I'm going to finish one side first and then finish the other off camera. So what we want to do here is to cut clip that like so for now. Once we have that, what we want to do is match point A with point A on the other side. There we are. Point A matches with point A. And I'm going to pin that at a diagonal. And I'm going to push all of the seam allowances towards B. Because what we want to do is we want to sew between A and B and then up or come down this way. So pin there, and then just come back a little bit. We're going to pin baste here. Because what will happen when we go to the machine, we're going to put the zipper foot on and we're going to sew starting here down to about 1/2 inch from the corner at A, short stitches to A, and then short stitches all the way and stop back tack at B. So let's go over to the machine and do that. As you can see, I have my trusty generic zipper foot, but you can see the needle is to the right of the foot for this particular operation. You begin standard 2.5 stitch. So I sewed about 1/2 inch from point A, shortened the stitch to 0.5 to 0.75. Then we stop at point A, turn it, walk it one stitch, and then turn it this way. And now you can see why I'm using the zipper foot, because we want to dodge around all of this mass here. And so it's best to sew with the short stitch. And then back tack at point B. Now let me remove it from the machine and show you the result. So really, so we started up here, came down to here and over to point B. Now, I'm going to go to the other front because I went ahead and pinned that off camera because it's just good to see it coming and going, for lack of a better way of putting it. So here, there we go. Again, the needle is to the right of the foot, and we're going to start at point B. Back tack, and we're going to sew with some short stitches, the 0.5 to 0.75. Point A, turn it, one stitch, and then so with the short stitches for about a 1/2 inch, and lengthen to your standard 2.5. And blend with the stitching that you already have in. Now, let me show you the result of that.
I see a chat. So let's see. You sewed from top to bottom on one side and from bottom to top on the other. If it was knock block fused and perhaps with a looser weave fabric with underlining, would this change in direction matter? You know, I tend to pin based, and the directional sewing thing is something to address. I pin based, and a lot of times I'll thread based. And if you pin based or thread based, the directional sewing is not as much of an issue as if you're just pinning. That's so the changing of direction it's not going to hang you up in details like this.
So yes, so you see, we started there to here and back. And now back to the work table. So here we are, and we need to do some trimming. I have graded these seam allowances down to 1/4 inch already. So we want to first clip into here at point B. And also clip the corner at A. And then what I will do is pink this curve because it just makes it much easier to press. What that will look like here. So these are the moves we make. Also, well, actually, I think I'm going to wait until I press this because we need to press these open. So I will go off camera and trim the other side and meet you at the pressing table. First,
So I'm going to stop here and see if we have questions, because I imagine this makes everyone glaze over. It's quite a lot to absorb. So we good? And aren't you glad we have a video for this?
Yes, I'm glad there is a video for this.
Okay.
we press as sewn. Then from here, what we're going to do is get our point presser out. Now the point presser is going to help us make those corners press very nicely. So we start, let me bring it over on this side, a little easier. So I'm going to that there. press this open here. I'll press above off camera, but so we pressed from here to here, from here to here. Now I'm going to turn the work so that I can press here.
Is there no need to grade that seam allowance there in the
I'll
front?
grade this a little later. What I found in certain situations like this is easier to press it open, then grade it down after you press it open. It's easier to
Yeah.
manipulate the seam allowances.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Then, looking ahead a little bit, thinking a little bit ahead, what we want to do is press this corner open. This is a point A to B, and then I'm going to turn this back to get the other part of that corner. So we have, here we are. We've pressed here, 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 and here. So then what I'm going to do is go off camera and press these curves here like we did on the Peplum before. So now I have pressed everything open. And at this point, it's a matter of turning everything right side out. But first, I need to trim a couple of seam allowances out. So on the facing side for these, I want to trim these to 1/4 of an inch to reduce the bulk. There, and there, and the same thing on the other side. So once this is trimmed out, I will go off camera and turn everything right side out and bring you back the results. You can see here that as I was pressing, I was also basting. This is a little sidebar on uneven basting. You first anchor your thread. You don't leave a knot there because you don't want to risk leaving an impression if you're pressing. You don't want to leave a little knot there. So you have 2 stitches. Then you leave a space. This could be 3/4 of an inch. This can be an inch. Doesn't really matter. But the object here, uneven. So you have 1 long, 2 short. Yeah, you're probably wondering why. Why don't you just make them the same length? And the reason for that is they're easier to remove. So after you have whatever you've done completed, and you need to take this out, it's considered bad form to just grab a thread and pull. So I'm just going to do that. So every other stitch you clip. And it gives you a stitch like so. So that is why you would use uneven basting. Because it's just much easier to baste as you're pressing so that everything holds true. So I'm going to show you a little trick to square up your corners. Now, I would normally use a pressing cloth on this, but since this is a sample, it's not really going to matter that much. No one's going to be wearing this, but see how that corner is a little bit rounded. So you use your point turner to get it as crisp as you can. So what I'm doing here is I'm catching the corner with the needle and thread. And pulling and pressing. Beautiful. So here we have the facing on the front. Now, one thing I want to do on the neck or all around the facings, I'm going to show you up here, is it needs an edge stitch to hold the edge, and you could sew that by machine if you wish, but I'm going to sew it with a pick stitch because I think that's much prettier. So while I'm going to do that, I will demonstrate it as well. The pick stitch. Now for the thread, I'm using the Gutermann, it's called Mara 30. Gutermann Mara 30. It's a polyester thread. I use it for buttonholes. I use it for sewing on buttons. I use it for pick stitching and top stitching sometimes. So we're going to be threading a single strand. I'm going to start, bring the thread between the layers and bring it up about 1/8 of an inch from that seam. See, what you're doing is you're sewing the seam allowances to the facing. Now it's a tiny little back stitch. And so the object here is to catch everything but the front layer of fabric. And you want these to be, about 1/4 of an inch apart. So if you look here, see, you don't see any needle showing there. That's what you want. You don't want this to show on the outside. And as you can see here, when you're sewing it, in certain fabrics, it will just disappear. Let me just roll that down a little bit. Let me zoom in a little. There we go. Okay. Now, some people feel like this may be a little bit much as far as labor goes. You could actually sew this by machine, but why not sew it by hand? You have a lot more control. It looks so much prettier. Okay, so now you can see that you barely see it, depending on the texture of the fabric, of course. So that said, I'm going to go off camera and sew the rest of this, and I will bring back the results. Almost done.
Can I ask Kenneth? I thought like in tailoring and stuff, when I've done this kind of finishing the prick stitch for along the neckline and the collar, that they suggest using like a silk thread. What are your thoughts on that?
You could. See, I tend to use polyester. I assume in the garments that I make that they're not going to be stored properly.
Yeah.
No, seriously.
Yeah, yeah.
And so, part of building, because see, where I got this 25 to 30 year useful life number years ago, there was a museum show called Artwear, Fashion and Anti-Fashion at the Legion of Honor in San Francisco. And as it turns out, one of my hats was in the show. Talking to the curator, she said that at the time I was kind of ahead of the game because generally most people who would collect the kinds of things I make would come out of their collections between 25 and 30 years after they bought them. So I build for a 25 to 30 year useful life. So silk, as we know, if it's not stored properly, it's just gonna deteriorate. Polyester is forever. So you could use silk, you could use polyester. That's another one of those, whatever gets the result you wish is what you use.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, thanks.
Okay. So
Okay, so we stop where the pin is because that's where we started. And then to secure the thread, what I like to do is go backwards 1 or 2 stitches. And then you just bury the thread between the layers and trim. So there we are. That's the pick stitching. Now, let's have a look at what we have accomplished. Now you can see along here, I have made thread chains in red, so you can see them, to hold up the facing at the bottom, and also at the center back. So now that we're ready to go, let's look at what we've just done. So here we have the jacket with the facing. As you can see, we have the uneven basting. Here is the completed peplum. Is that not wonderful? Complete with the beautiful corners. And the facing, as you can see, we have some thread chains to hold the facing up down at the hem and also at the neck. So really, at this point, the next step is going to be finishing the construction.
So here we are. So how you feeling? We
I
good?
love it. It's so nice. I'm curious about how are you installing the lining with the
You're going to see that next.
Oh, okay, cool. Good.
Yes. Because the lining, the lining just kind of covers everything. That's why I have the 2 thread chains to hold that part of the peplum up, because then that just kind of floats inside the garment, which you'll see.
Yeah.
But yes, so yeah, so
guess, yeah,
go ahead.
because I could see how I mean, we're gonna learn, so I'll just wait.
Well, no, go ahead and ask out, because then we can, I can point it out.
Well, because I could see how by thread tacking or chain tacking the hem up, like you could do the hem by hand. So are you doing it all by hand? Yeah, because by doing that at the top as well, then yeah, you can't sew it with machine.
Yeah, see, there's this thing called bagging a lining, and honest to God, I've been sewing for a number of years, and I'm not a bad sewer. I can never make a bag lining work.
I do okay if I've done it the way you like, to take it from this point to do to machine the lining in because you've set, but I've seen people where they sew the facing to the lining and then they bag it out a lot. And I'm like, that doesn't make any.
No.
I had a client, a high profile client with incredibly high standards dictate that I had to sew it that way. And I was like, you're killing me. Like that I have to sew it this way. So I'm always, put the order of construction is also kind of dependent on.
Yeah. See, I have never sewn the facing to the lining and then the facing it. I've never done it that way. Because see, there's that thing where you turn it through one little opening here.
Yes. And that's what they wanted us to do. And I was like, oh my God.
Works for me,
Never.
and I'm not a stupid person. But it just never works. And so, thankfully I don't have, I'm the one, who says this is how it's going to go together. If I had someone say to me, this is how I want it constructed, I would probably say, then you need
one day over coffee, kind of not recorded, we'll have a conversation about who that is.
Okay. Well, we're recording off here because it's there. Because people think, when you go look at retail garments, and what they charge, they think they're constructed beautifully. And as you probably know, I have seen some horror shows inside garments that cost a lot of money, and people get all but hurt about what I charge. Like, but my garment's going to last you 25 to 30 years.
Exactly.
There's a difference. So anyway, okay. So other questions before we continue?
I really did have one in the chat.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Let's see,
and I was expecting more of a tailored construction in the jacket. How do you decide when more of the tailoring techniques, such as a chest shield, taping of the slope neckline, or more structured of the center front should be used?
That's one of those it depends things. First off, what I have found for this, because this peplum jacket is more of a lady's garment rather than a man's garment. And what I'm finding is that my lady clients don't want so much structure up in this area. They don't want it to be too stiff. If it were a gal who had some sort of like concave or whatever, she probably wouldn't be going for a peplum jacket. So there's what's called a dressmaker jacket, which is what this is. And then there's the bespoke tailoring. In the dressmaker jacket, you may interline the entire the entire thing with the canvas. You may have a body canvas. This is going to have shoulder pads in it, just so you know. You may have a front canvas and a back stay, but the shields and all of that's for someone who that's because what the shields do, you've got the collarbone, you've got the shoulder joint, you've got a hollow right here. So what the shield does is it makes the garment sit flat in that area. There's what's called a drape suit. You probably heard that term. And it has a fold right here because it doesn't have shields. So it's just a difference in look. Do you want something a little softer, a little more supple? Do you want something a little more structured? Like some of those 40s jackets with the shoulders and all, yeah, they have all that in there. And they'll have all of this. So I think the decision is, okay, what silhouette are you trying to achieve? And then balance that with comfort, because sometimes the comfort, wearing something stiff like that, some gals these days don't want to wear something that's quite so stiff.
Do you think it also depends, like you're using a pretty substantial wool for this as well? Like if it was something more thin, maybe you might want to have a little bit more in there, possibly. Like thinking of all those other variables as well.
Yeah. And
also,
so, yeah, go ahead.
I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
Also, it's just like the build of the body of women versus the body of men. The ratio for the arm with the shoulder and the build of the shoulder with the breast is totally different. So what I discovered, and I am an architect, so I'm building like a facade for a building.
Right.
I look at it that I do not need any more reinforcement in that part of the body. Because like for a man, I look at it and even for a slim person, they don't need that extra padding on construction unless you want to make the man, you add like padding to make it bigger, to make have a larger shoulder, like a shoulder pad. While if you were just, you know, making a wrap of the body and make the body and the garment talk to each other, you don't always need that extra you know, facing for the shoulder facing and all of these things, because what it makes it, it's as if it's sitting on a hanger versus it's sitting on the body.
Right. Yeah, that actually makes quite a lot of sense. See, I've always looked upon one of the things that I always was fascinated about. I remember when I was in college, I remember my fashion history professor had this book, and if I knew the name of the book, I'd buy it because it had kind of an engineering exploded drawing of the Dior bar suit, you know, like the lining out and the bones, and you know, all, I mean, and the idea of a garment as architecture around the body was something that really appealed to me. So, you know, I'm kind of down with let's put some more, you know, let's build that thing out. But at the same time, you have to, it has to be appropriate for the person wearing it and also kind of what's in fashion at the time. So there are a lot of different variables. So, you know, I think it's just one of those, another question, it depends on what, you know, what kind of effect you're trying to achieve. Yeah, go ahead. Yes.
If I also want to add, because that's one thing that I look at it from artistic perspective, is if there is a symmetry, then you and you want to cover it, then you use whatever you have to achieve your goal. While if you don't have any of those issues, you don't need to add all of these things. Also, what we are sewing right now, and it's very sad that a lot of time we make those garments and we use them like 3 times, 4 times. We use it for a short time. While in the time in the 40s and before, the lady would have a jacket and she would have it for 10 years and will wear it for 10 years. So the longevity of that and how you're going to be able to keep that for such a long time is by adding all of these extra layers. And they didn't have as sophisticated dry cleaning or any of these things. So we can, with the technology that we have and the technology of the fabric itself, because fabric at that time were not weaved in the same way that they are weaved right now. So it does make huge differences. That's what my perspective. If I want to deliver artistically fit thing, then I have to use the technology that I have right now.
Yeah, well, but you know, if kind of addressing that longevity of a garment, that's what men's bespoke. You know, if you've ever looked inside men's bespoke jackets, because see, the point of a men's bespoke jacket is that it should last you pretty much your life. I remember doing some research about this, and they can build a 25 to 30 pound weight change just by the seam allowances. And so, yeah, the idea that you have something built, and built is really the word, with all that in it, is because part of the reason is you want that thing to last for the rest of your life. So it's, you know, differences of and use and result. Okay.
Beverly had another question. She's asking, what sort of figure would you think a peplum jacket suits the most?
You know, if you're rail thin and have no hips, this is really great. If you want to wear some sort of waist cincher to pull your waist in, and you have some full hips, this is also good. One of the reasons that I came up with the sleeve, which we're going to be showing next time, is I think there are people who probably like the idea of this, but it may not look well on their figure. And so this is a way of taking this particular same idea, translating it into, and actually I have it right here. And this is the cuff. And see how that kind of angles out like that. I'm going to show you how to achieve that as well. But it's kind of the same thing, but it's interpreted differently. So if you don't think you look well in a jacket with a peplum like this, you
Do
could,
you think if you had like a larger bust and not so much a defined waist, that this is probably not the best silhouette to be.
if you could create some sort of, full bust and
It's got to come in at the waist to really, yeah.
it gives a better line that way. But, but see, this is where once you kind of understand this, you can start thinking, okay, how might this look as like the bottom of a coat with an interesting pocket detail on it? There are other ways you could approach this particular idea that would not necessarily give you this kind of jacket. So I guess that's why I wanted to do the sleeve, because I figured that, it can kind of broaden your horizons as to, if you understand this particular draft, you can take this then and adapt it for other kinds of things, which is, I think, a lot more democratic. Yes, go ahead.
So even if, let's say, if someone do not have the waist like straight,
Mhm.
you can camouflage that straightness with
Yes.
the peplum and have that. Let's say someone had a belly and you want to camouflage the belly. You do not make the second part of the facing of the peplum from the same fabric. If it is a thick fabric, you can play with the lining fabric and make it thinner, and then play with that to defer the eye, because you play with how the eye is moving.
Yes.
You move to the fabric or to the figure.
Right.
So
the eye reads silhouette. So if you can create that kind of thing at the sides, part of it is, one of the things I learned from Simone is, if you have a slimmer sleeve, which means you're going to fit it up higher, you have more space between here and here. So it creates part of that. So this is all, in the designing and fitting portion. Okay.
Also proportions of where that peplum would start and finish. It would be important as well, I think.
Yeah. And so when I have students designing, one of the things, they look at the object itself, but what I say to them is, okay, look at the entire picture, because the jacket is only one part of the entire picture. So yeah, it's all stuff you have to think about. So let's put the lining in this, shall we? So here we are. Again, bring that down a little bit. So and as before, don't be shy about asking questions, because that's what I'm here for. So
I worked ahead. As you can see, I've sewn the lining and I have positioned it in. Now you notice here, again, I've sewn with the uneven basting so that it will make these basting stitches easier to remove once the lining is sewn in. We will be sewing the lining by hand. So what I'm going to show you here is, I started at one shoulder. Well, actually, it started over here and pinned all the way around. So now I'm going to show you how to position this area here around the neck facing. So now what I have to do is change the camera angle, so I will return. So you can see here, I turned this upside down. Here is the neck. Here are the sleeve linings. So what we're looking for is, that's the seam. These two notches are the center back. Now, as you can see,
Quick, Kenneth,
yeah, go ahead.
before we go to this step, you've already installed the shoulder pads at this point.
Yeah, I've already installed the sleeves, the shoulder pads, and all of that. Yes. Okay.
The seam allowance is back along the stitching line. After, just zoom in here, this here, from here to here, is 1/2 inch. That gives me an easier pressing when I have the stay stitching. So really what we're going to do is, we want to match up those two notches. And it doesn't matter whether you fold it to the left or to the right. You just want to fold it to one side. And then you match up the cut edges of the pleat here with the body. And then I'm going to turn it over this way and pin. So now once I've pinned, I'm just going to come in here. This is just going to make life a little easier. And sew a little thread based. And you can leave this in when everything is in position.
Do you always press the pleat to one side, or do you sometimes do it like a box pleat?
You know, I like it to one side. I think it's less bulk.
Yeah.
And it doesn't matter whether it's to the left or to the right. That is just up to you.
Okay, so let's trim the threads. Okay, so now that pleat is at the center back. And we find the notch. There's the notch, there's the center back seam. So what we're going to do here is we're going to position this fold about 5/8 up from the cut edge. And pin. Now a little tip, notice how I bury the pin, the point of the pin in the fabric. When you're working on linings or other fabrics that could be snagged easily by a pin, this is how I like to pin. I like the pin, the point of the pin under the surface of the fabric. You're less likely to do damage then. So now let's zoom back out. So really, the object here then is to position you just want everything to lie flat. And when you pin, ideally you pin just through the facing, but if you can't, if you have to pin through all layers initially, you're going to be fine, because we're going to come back here in just a moment and base this into position. Now, some people would say, why don't you just pin the whole thing instead of basting it? You could. But I have found two things. One, I find that if I pin it, I will either snag something with the pin, or I will catch my hand sewing thread on the pin, which is very maddening. So the other reason is you can then put it on the dress form and check it to make sure that you've not created any binds where the lining pulls at the outer garment. Okay, so here we are. So now I'm only drawing that. Yeah, ta-da! There we are. So this is all pinned, ready for basting. I will go get another needle and thread and return back here. You can see I've anchored my thread, and then again, uneven basting. One long and two short. The object here, and notice I have my hand underneath, you don't want to catch the outer layer. You just want to catch the facing. So I would say go slow on this. And you can feel if your thread has, if your needle has gone too far. Now what I can do here is check. I grab this and pull. And if it pulls, that means I've not caught the body of the garment. So So now I'm going to continue around with the uneven basting and I will return with the results. Almost done. Secure the thread here. Okay, beautiful. So now I will be sewing this with a felling stitch. Now with a felling stitch, I like a double thread. I have a general rule when working on the inside of a garment. I tend to like to use a double thread because you're less likely to lose a needle inside the garment. Now, if this is something for yourself and you find the needle, no harm, no foul. But if you lose a needle and this is for someone else, then it could be trouble. So the felling stitch, just to demonstrate, hide your knot underneath. You're just going to come up, and the object here, you just want to catch. You're just going to catch a tiny, tiny bit at the fold of the edge. Now, the stitch itself is going to be perpendicular to the folded edge. This is where you want to use a really good needle so you can just catch this barely. Now, I like the stitches about 1/4 inch apart. You could use a slip stitch on this as well. I just like the way the felling stitch looks. I just think it's prettier. And just sew a few more stitches just so you can get a sense of what it looks like.
What is the difference between this and a slip stitch? Because this is
Well, a slip
what I
stitch,
use.
what you're going to do, you're going to tunnel through,
Oh, in the,
then you come here and tunnel under the facing and kind of go back and
yes.
forth like so. It gives a little different look. I just think this is prettier.
Yeah.
Just a personal preference.
But again, yes, just catching the facing and the little folded edge on the lining. So now let me just pull this stitch closed and I'll give you, that is what it should look like. It should just barely call attention to itself. And it's going to make a little bit of a ripple, but that is a tell. That tells people that this was sewn in by hand, which is a desirable thing. So at this point, I'm going to go off camera and finish sewing all of this in and bring you back the results. So as you can see, I have sewn all the way around and I'm ending up right where I began. Couple more stitches. Okay, so now let me tie this off. Bury the thread. There we have it. So let me change the camera angle and I will show you the results. So here we have the lining sewn. Now let me just show you the beauty of the uneven basting here. You clip every other long stitch. Like so. And then you just grab the long stitches. It makes for removing basting as quick work. So now I will go off camera and remove the basting. Then I will move on to sewing the cuffs. as you can see, I have one of the cuffs set up for sewing. And I'm going to set this one up, show you how this works. First, you want to turn back the hem allowance on the cuff. Now you notice here, I just did a little thread tack. Notice that the cuff is not hemmed anywhere else. The lining will hold the cuff in place. So here, I've pressed up about a 1/2 inch. So you want to match this seam. You just match the cut edge, and you just want that fold to just cover what you need it to cover. There's one pin, and then we turn, and here's the other one. There goes to here. So yeah, you can see we're matching cut edges to cut edges. Then here, flip this over. Just do this by eye. You just want to make sure that the fold on the lining is parallel to the fold at the cuff. Yeah. Flip this up and over. Again, yes, make sure everything is parallel, all parallel there. So from here, now that these are pinned, I will go off camera and sew these with the same felling stitch, and I will bring you back the results. We're almost done. Now, it goes without saying, but I'm going to say it. You just want to catch the hem allowance. You don't want to go all the way through to the front because it just looks better that way. So let me just secure the thread here. So once the thread is secured, turn this right side out. Now let's just survey the two cuffs. There we are. Now from here, I'm going to go off camera and remove all of the basting, and I will bring it back to show you the result. And here we have the jacket ready for buttons, buttonholes, and pressing. So I'm just going to scan. There's that beautiful peplum. Here's the cuffs. There we are. Since I last saw you, I got the buttonholes worked on this particular jacket, and we sewn on the buttons. So here we have the finished jacket. As you can see, the peplum is quite stylish and quite attractive. The front view here shows it off nicely, and the side view as well. Everything's done on this jacket, but as this video is called The Tale of Two Jackets, we're now going to make another jacket using what we've learned with this jacket.
Okay. So, questions? Are your brains full? You feeling bleary?
Yeah, it was beautiful, beautiful. And I want to just point out that I have been doing the felling stitch. It's my favorite stitch because
Yeah.
it does. It looks so pretty and you don't see it. And I just would like tell my workers and stuff to, I'm like, do it like this. I would show them, and they've asked me what the name of it was. And so I looked for the name of it and I thought it was named a slip stitch. So that's why I was asking for the clarification.
You know, it's there. Different people call things. I've heard it called the fell stitch and the felling stitch. You see it a lot in millinery.
Yes.
Hat bands and such. But yeah, so as long as you know to do the stitch, at FIT, I like to give them the proper names because at the beginning of the semester, especially in the couture construction, it's like you have to know your hand stitches, because when I say put this down with a felling stitch, I don't want a blank look. I want you to go and do it. So yeah, so there you have it. So questions? Okay, well, I think we'll turn off the recording now.